"Another one, Mrs. Croft?" the server asked, her voice a soft, weary thread in the cacophony of the grand majestic ballroom. Beatrice Croft, draped in silk the color of blood diamonds, didn't even look at the young woman. She waved a dismissive hand, heavy with rings, causing the server to flinch back. "Just keep them coming, girl. And try not to be so visible." The words were acid, meant to dissolve the server's very presence. From across the room, seated at the head table on a raised dais, Alexander Sterling watched the exchange through a haze of boredom and expensive champagne. This charity ball, an annual obligation for Sterling Industries, felt like a prison of starched collars and false smiles. He saw the server, a young black woman in a simple, severe black and white uniform, nod silently and retreat. There was a quiet dignity in the set of her shoulders that snagged his attention for a fraction of a second before he dismissed it. He was the king of a silent, lonely kingdom built of glass and steel, and the people who served him were no more real than the crystal flutes they carried. He had inherited the world from his father, but not the man's heart. His was a hollow space, echoing with the ghost of a grief he refused to acknowledge. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet server and the cruel socialite were on a collision course, and in the wreckage, his entire world of cold, calculated indifference was about to be shattered. The collision came sooner than anyone expected. Alara Vance moved with a practiced grace through the glittering maze of tables, her tray a silver moon balancing a constellation of champagne glasses. She was exhausted. The catering company had her on a double shift to cover this gala, and the meager pay would barely cover the new medication her little brother, Leo, needed. She navigated past a boisterous cluster of men in tuxedos, her focus absolute. But as she neared Beatrice Croft's table, the woman shifted her chair, extending a leg clad in a shimmering, snakeskin-patterned fabric. It was a subtle, deliberate movement. Alara's foot caught. Time seemed to warp, stretching into a syrupy, horrifying crawl. The tray tilted, a slow-motion disaster. The crystal glasses cascaded, not onto the floor, but directly onto the front of Beatrice Croft's couture gown. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Champagne and shattered glass decorated the blood-red silk. Beatrice erupted. "You clumsy, incompetent fool!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the orchestral music. Every head turned. The room fell into a sudden, stunned silence. "Look what you've done. This gown is worth more than your entire miserable life." Alara stood frozen, her face pale with shock and humiliation. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I tripped." "You tripped," Beatrice sneered, rising to her full, imposing height. She jabbed a finger at Alara's simple uniform. "Or were you simply blinded by all the wealth you could never hope to possess? People like you don't belong here. You exist to serve, silently and invisibly. You have failed at the one simple task you were given." From his elevated table, Alexander felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. It wasn't pity. It was irritation. The scene was distasteful, a disruption to his carefully managed ennui. He watched Alara, expecting tears, a panicked apology, begging. Instead, she straightened her shoulders. She looked Beatrice Croft directly in the eye, and though her voice trembled slightly, it was clear and steady. "An accident does not define my worth, Mrs. Croft, and my uniform does not define my humanity." The sheer, unexpected courage of the statement hung in the air. For a moment, Beatrice was speechless. Then her face contorted with rage. She raised her hand, and the sound of her palm cracking against Alara's cheek echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Slap. Every head turned. In that instant, Beatrice Croft had just made the biggest mistake of her life, a mistake that would unravel her carefully constructed world. And Alexander Sterling, the man who felt nothing, felt a sudden, violent jolt, as if a lightning strike had just restarted his long-dormant heart. Security guards materialized, their movements swift and impersonal. They flanked Alara, their presence an immediate judgment. "Ma'am, you'll have to come with us," one said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Beatrice, meanwhile, was preening, soaking in the sympathetic murmurs from her table mates. "She should be fired, of course," she declared loudly. "And the company should pay for the damages." Utterly disgraceful, Ilara didn't resist. She gave a final, unflinching look at Beatrice, a look devoid of hatred but filled with a profound, sorrowful dignity, before allowing herself to be led away through a service door. The orchestra, after a hesitant pause, began to play again. The chatter slowly resumed. The incident was over, a brief, unpleasant ripple in a sea of champagne. But for Alexander it wasn't over. The image of Ilara's steady gaze after being struck was burned into his mind. It was a look he hadn't seen in years, not in his boardrooms, not in the society pages, not even in his own mirror. It was integrity. The next morning, Alexander did something he hadn't done in a decade. He made a call himself, bypassing his legion of assistants. He called the Sterling Foundation, the philanthropic arm of his company and the primary sponsor of last night's ball. "Get me the name of the catering company from the gala," he commanded. And the name of the server involved in the incident with Mrs. Croft an hour later. He had the information. Ilara Vance. Employed by Gourmet Guild Catering. A cursory background check, conducted by his head of security, revealed very little. She lived in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, had one younger brother, and was enrolled part-time at a city college until last semester. The file was thin, the life it described modest. It didn't explain the fire in her eyes. It wasn't enough. Alexander needed to understand. He made another, more unorthodox decision. He wouldn't summon her to his office. He wouldn't send an emissary with a check. He would see her world for himself. He had his security chief arrange it. He was given a false name, Alex Carter, and a position as a temporary kitchen porter at Gourmet Guild, starting the next day. When he arrived at the industrial kitchen, a world of steam, clattering steel, and shouting, he felt like an alien on a hostile planet. He traded his $1,000 suit for a cheap, ill-fitting uniform identical to the one Ilara had worn. It felt coarse against his skin, a uniform of invisibility. He saw her almost immediately. She was in the dish pit, her arms submerged to the elbows in greasy water, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't look defeated. She looked focused. Throughout the grueling 10-hour shift, he watched her. He saw the shift manager, a belligerent man named Riggs, berate her for being 2 minutes late, docking her pay. He saw other workers, their faces etched with the same bone-deep weariness, share sympathetic glances but say nothing. He saw Ilara, during her brief lunch break, share half of her simple sandwich with a new trainee who hadn't brought any food. She was kind, competent, and relentlessly targeted. "Vance," Riggs barked later that afternoon. "You're on bathroom duty for the Henderson wedding tonight. Don't want any accidents." It was a clear punishment, a demotion designed to humiliate. Alexander watched her face for a reaction, but she simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and went to fetch the cleaning supplies. He saw it then. Her quiet dignity wasn't a performance. It was her armor. Later, as the shift ended, he found a moment to speak to her. "That was rough," he said, his voice sounding strange and common in his own ears. "What happened last night?" She finally looked at him, her dark eyes appraising him coolly. "It was what it was," she said, her tone guarded. "People like Mrs. Croft, they need to feel powerful. They do it by making people like us feel small." Alexander was taken aback by her perception. "You don't seem to feel small." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Feeling small is a choice," she said, before turning to clock out. As she walked away, a piece of paper fell from her worn satchel. Alexander picked it up. It wasn't a complaint form or a union pamphlet. It was sheet music, covered in handwritten notes and complex chord progressions. That was the first piece of the puzzle. Ilara Vance wasn't just a server. She was something more. Alexander spent another week as Alex Carter, kitchen porter. The work was brutal. His muscles ached in ways he never knew possible, and his hands were raw. But for the first time since his father's death, he felt awake. He learned the rhythms of this hidden world. He learned the names of the other workers: Maria, a single mother from El Salvador. Javier, a young man trying to save for college. Old Mr. Chan, who had been with the company for 30 years. He learned their stories, whispered over overflowing sinks and stacked crates. And at the center of it all was Alara. He saw her console Maria when her child was sick. He saw her quietly slip Javier $20 when his wallet was stolen. He saw her patiently re-explaining a task to Mr. Chun when Riggs had screamed at him for being too slow. She was the quiet conscience of a place that tried to have none. He learned more about the sheet music. During a shared break, he cautiously brought it up. "I saw you drop this the other day," he said, trying to sound casual. "You a musician?" Her guard, which had been so high, lowered a fraction. A light sparked in her eyes. "I'm trying to be," she confessed. "I was studying vocal performance at the City College." "Classical and jazz, was?" he asked gently. She sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of her reality. "Life gets in the way. My brother, Leo, he has a chronic respiratory condition. The medical bills, they don't stop." She spoke of her dream not with self-pity, but with a pragmatist's resignation. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. The injustice of it all began to coil in Alexander's gut. A hot, unfamiliar anger. A woman with so much talent, so much heart, was scrubbing toilets because the world had dealt her an impossible hand. He started to piece together a larger, more sinister picture. He noticed how overtime was never paid correctly, how safety violations were ignored, how anyone who spoke up was suddenly taken off the schedule. It wasn't just a cruel manager. The cruelty was systemic. The company profited from the desperation of its employees. And clients like Beatrice Croft were complicit, demanding ever lower costs, which were squeezed from the wages and dignity of the workers. This wasn't just about one slap at a gala. This was about a whole system of slaps, delivered every single day in 1,000 different ways. His investigation deepened. He used his real resources at night, having his legal team discreetly pull the company's financials and labor records. What he found was damning. Gourmet Guild was a predatory machine, and Beatrice Croft was one of its key investors. She sat on their board. Her demand for low costs wasn't just a preference. It was a mandate that directly increased her own profits. She wasn't just a cruel woman. She was a predator, profiting from the misery she so clearly enjoyed inflicting. The knowledge made him sick. It also gave him a purpose. He would not just help Alara. He would burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, he found Alara sitting alone in the break room, long after everyone else had left. She was staring at a photograph on her phone, and he could see the faint glint of tears on her cheeks. He hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but a force stronger than his old reserve pulled him forward. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She quickly wiped her eyes and looked up, startled. She managed a weak smile. "Just a tough day. Leo had another bad spell this morning." He sat down across from her, the grimy table separating their two worlds. "Tell me about him," Alexander said, and the sincerity in his voice seemed to surprise her. For the first time, she truly opened up. She told him about Leo, a bright, funny 10-year-old boy who loved to draw superheroes but could barely run across a room without gasping for breath. She described the constant fear, the late-night trips to the emergency room, the crushing weight of the bills. "He's the reason I do all this," she whispered, her gaze distant. "He's so brave. He never complains. And I just want to give him a life where he can breathe." Then she spoke of her music, of how singing was the one place she felt free, a place where the fear and the exhaustion couldn't touch her. She told him about her dream of one day singing on a real stage, not for fame, but to create something beautiful in a world that often felt so ugly. "It feels silly to even think about it now," she finished, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander listened, and as he did, the last walls around his hollow heart crumbled. He wasn't just hearing a story of hardship. He was witnessing a testament to love, resilience, and a spirit that refused to be extinguished. He saw not a victim, but a warrior. "It's not silly," he said, his voice raw. "Your dream isn't silly, Alara. It's essential in that moment he was no longer Alex Carter, the porter, or Alexander Sterling, the billionaire. He was just a man, humbled by the strength of the woman sitting across from him. He felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to fix everything, to hand her the world on a silver platter. But he knew that wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want a handout. She wanted a chance. He realized then that his wealth, which had always felt like a barrier, could be a bridge. It could be a tool, a weapon to be wielded for good. The next day, he saw Alara talking quietly with Javier and Maria, a small group gathering around her. He caught snippets of their conversation. Not right. We have rights. If we all speak up. He realized with a jolt what was happening. She was organizing them. She was risking the very job she desperately needed to fight for everyone. It was an act of incredible, reckless bravery. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that if Beatrice Croft or Riggs found out, they would not just fire her. They would try to destroy her. This was the turning point. The fight was no longer just his. It was theirs. The news came through the kitchen's rumor mill like a shockwave. Sterling Industries was hosting its annual Visionary Awards Gala in 2 weeks, and Gourmet Guild had won the catering contract. For the staff, it meant the promise of a big, high-pressure, and hopefully lucrative night. For Alexander, it was a declaration of war. He knew Beatrice Croft would be there. She was a perennial fixture at such events, a vulture circling the city's wealth. He also knew this was the perfect stage. He accelerated his plans. At night, he met with his legal team, building an airtight case against Gourmet Guild and its board members. He had sworn affidavits from former employees, documentation of wage theft, and proof of Beatrice's financial entanglement and predatory practices. He was building a guillotine, and he would let her place her own neck in it. During the day, he continued to play his part as Alex Carter, watching as Alara's quiet organizing gained momentum. More workers started talking, sharing their stories, their fears slowly being replaced by a fragile spark of hope. Alara was their leader, not through speeches, but through her unwavering empathy and courage. But their secrecy was not perfect. Riggs, the manager, was a company man, his eyes and ears everywhere. He noticed the hushed conversations, the new sense of solidarity. He reported it all to his superiors, and the information quickly found its way to Beatrice Croft. For Beatrice, this was an intolerable offense. That a lowly server, the same one she had publicly humiliated, would dare to challenge her authority and her profits was a personal insult. She decided Alara needed to be taught a final public lesson. She needed to be utterly broken. The trap was set for the night of the Sterling Gala. It was cruelly simple. Beatrice would lose a diamond bracelet, a family heirloom worth a small fortune. A sympathetic manager, Riggs, would suggest a search of the staff's belongings as they clocked out. The bracelet would, of course, be found in Alara's worn satchel, where a trusted accomplice of Riggs would plant it during the event. She would be accused of theft, arrested in front of her peers, and her name would be dragged through the mud. She would be unemployable, her reputation shattered. Her little rebellion would be crushed. Alexander learned of the plan through a source his security team had cultivated within the catering company's management. A wave of cold fury washed over him. The sheer, calculated evil of it was breathtaking. This was no longer about profit or power. It was about cruelty for its own sake. He now had a choice to make. He could intervene quietly, have the planted bracelet removed, and get Alara out of there before the trap was sprung. It would be safe. It would be clean. But it would be insufficient. The system would remain. Beatrice would face no consequences. Alara and the others would go back to their lives of quiet desperation. Or he could let the trap spring. He could let Beatrice play her hand in the most public forum imaginable. He could risk everything. A scandal, a media circus, the potential for it all to backfire, to expose the truth in a way that no one could ignore. He looked across the bustling kitchen at Alara, who was calmly briefing a group of new servers, her voice a steady and reassuring presence. He thought of her brother, Leo, and her dream of singing. He thought of her quiet statement at the first gala. "My uniform does not define my humanity." He made his choice. He would not just save her from the fire. He would use the fire to forge a new world. He let the pieces move into place, his own counter-movements hidden in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to declare checkmate. The night of the Sterling Visionary Awards was a symphony of opulence. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Tower was even more magnificent than the one at the Majestic, glittering with ice sculptures and cascades of white orchids. Alexander stood on a balcony overlooking the main floor, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was no longer Alex Carter. He was Alexander Sterling, master of this universe. He watched the guests arrive, titans of industry, political figures, the city's elite, and among them, resplendent in emerald green, was Beatrice Croft, laughing and holding court, utterly confident in the destruction she was about to unleash. Down below, in the chaos of the service corridors, Alara felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The scale of the event was overwhelming. Riggs had been watching her all night, his eyes filled with a smug, predatory gleam. She tried to focus on her work, on keeping her team of servers calm and efficient, but a sense of dread hung over her. The evening wore on. The awards were presented, speeches were made, and polite applause echoed through the vast space. Alexander delivered the keynote address, his voice cool and controlled, speaking of innovation and the future. No one in the room could have guessed the storm that was brewing inside him. Finally, as the event began to wind down and the staff prepared to leave, Beatrice made her move. A sudden, theatrical cry of distress. "My bracelet! My diamond bracelet is gone!" Panic and confusion rippled through her corner of the ballroom. Riggs appeared instantly, his face a mask of grave concern. "Mrs. Croft, this is terrible. We must search the staff. It's the only way." Whispers erupted. Heads turned toward the service staff, who were now huddled together, their faces a mixture of fear and indignation. It was happening exactly as planned. Beatrice pointed a trembling finger toward the group. "That girl," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. "The one from the other night. I saw her near my table. Search her." Two burly security guards, hired by the catering company, moved toward Alara. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I didn't take anything," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "This is a mistake." "We'll see about that," Riggs sneered, grabbing her satchel from her shoulder. He made a show of opening it, plunging his hand inside. The entire room was watching, a captive audience to her humiliation. He pulled his hand out, and dangling from his fingers was a glittering diamond bracelet. A collective gasp filled the ballroom. Beatrice smiled, a triumphant, venomous curl of her lips. "I knew it," she hissed. "A common thief. Arrest her." The guards took Alara by the arms. Tears of helpless rage and despair welled in her eyes. It was over. Her life was over. But then, a new voice cut through the tension, calm and resonant with absolute authority. "Stop." Every eye in the room turned toward the stage. Alexander Sterling was walking down the steps, his expression as hard and unyielding as granite. He walked directly to Alara, gently removing the guard's hands from her arms. He stood between her and her accusers, a silent, immovable shield. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Sterling?" Beatrice demanded, her composure faltering slightly. "This thief." "She is not a thief," Alexander stated, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. He turned to face the hundreds of stunned guests. "My name is Alexander Sterling. For the past 3 weeks, I have been working alongside Alara Vance as a kitchen porter for Gourmet Guild Catering." A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the crowd. He wasn't finished. "I have seen, firsthand, the deplorable conditions, the wage theft, and the culture of fear that this company, and its board members like Mrs. Croft, perpetuate to line their own pockets." He gestured to the massive screens on either side of the stage. "And I have evidence." The screens flickered to life. The first thing that appeared was crystal-clear security footage from a service corridor, time-stamped just an hour earlier. It showed Riggs's accomplice slipping the bracelet into Alara's unattended satchel. Murmurs turned into gasps of outrage. Beatrice Croft's face went white as a sheet. "This is doctored." "It's a lie!" she shrieked. "Is it?" Alexander's voice was like ice. The screen changed, now displaying internal company emails. Emails from Beatrice to the CEO of Gourmet Guild, demanding they keep labor costs at rock bottom and deal with any dissenters. Emails from Riggs to Beatrice, detailing Alara's attempts to organize her fellow workers. "It seems you weren't just punishing a supposed thief, Mrs. Croft," Alexander said, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "You were trying to silence a woman who had the courage to stand up to your corporate greed." He looked at Riggs, who was trembling. "And you, Mr. Riggs, you were her willing accomplice." The screen displayed bank records, showing a significant payment made from a holding company owned by Beatrice to Riggs's personal account just 2 days prior. The trap had been turned on its architect. Beatrice stood frozen, exposed and stripped bare in front of the very society she so desperately lorded over. Her power, built on a foundation of cruelty and lies, had crumbled to dust in a matter of moments. "The authorities are on their way, Mrs. Croft," Alexander said calmly, "for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and a list of labor violations that my legal team will be delighted to discuss with you." He then turned his attention back to the silent, watching crowd. "Tonight was meant to celebrate visionaries, but we have been blind. We celebrate wealth but ignore the human cost at which it is often created. Sterling Industries will no longer be complicit. As of tonight, we are severing all contracts with Gourmet Guild Catering. Furthermore, we are establishing a $500 million foundation to support workers' rights initiatives and to investigate and prosecute predatory companies like them. We will no longer do business with any company that does not pay a living wage and treat its employees with dignity and respect." A stunned silence held the room, followed by a tentative, then thunderous, round of applause. Alexander ignored it. He turned to Alara, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning hope. He saw the strength that had captivated him from the very beginning. "The scheduled performer for tonight's gala had to cancel," he said, his voice now soft, "for her alone. But I believe there is a visionary among us who deserves to be heard." He gestured toward the stage, where a single microphone stood in a pool of golden light. "Will you sing for us, Alara?" For a moment, she hesitated, looking from the microphone to the sea of faces. Then she looked at Alexander, and in his eyes, she saw not a billionaire, but the man who had sat with her in a grimy break room and told her that her dream was essential. She nodded. She walked to the stage not as a server in a simple uniform, but as an artist. She took the microphone. A hush fell over the ballroom, a silence so profound it was deafening. And then, she began to sing. It was an old spiritual, a song of sorrow and resilience, of hope in the face of despair. Her voice, a rich, powerful soprano, filled every corner of the vast room. It was a sound of such pure, heartbreaking beauty that it seemed to stop time itself. It soared over the silent, humbled crowd, a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit. It was the sound of chains breaking. The whole room froze, captivated, as the voice of the woman they had dismissed and scorned washed over them. A cleansing fire, a promise of a new dawn. 6 months later, the lights came up on the stage of the newly inaugurated Leo Vance Hall for the Performing Arts. The theater was a masterpiece of acoustics and elegant design, built by the Sterling Foundation for one purpose: to give a stage to artists from communities that had been overlooked and ignored. In the front row, a healthy, beaming 10-year-old boy named Leo watched, his breathing easy and deep, the best doctors in the country now managing his care. Backstage, Alexander Sterling watched the woman in the spotlight. Alara stood center stage, bathed in that same golden light, no longer in a server's uniform but in a simple, elegant gown the color of a midnight sky. The applause that thundered through the hall was for her. Not just for the beauty of her voice, which was now known across the country, but for the power of her story. After that fateful night, Beatrice Croft and the executives of Gourmet Guild had faced a storm of legal battles and public disgrace. Their empire of exploitation had collapsed, and Beatrice had become a pariah, her name synonymous with corporate malfeasance. The workers Alara had organized, with the backing of the new foundation, had successfully formed a union and negotiated a landmark contract with the company's new, reformed ownership. It was a revolution that had started with a single act of courage. Alara finished her final song, and the standing ovation was deafening. She bowed, a radiant smile on her face, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. Later, she found Alexander in the wings. "You were incredible," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride that went deeper than any business deal he had ever closed. "We were incredible," she corrected him, taking his hand. Their relationship had grown from the ashes of that conflict, a bond forged in a shared fight for justice and cemented by a deep, mutual respect that had blossomed into love. He had shown her a world of possibilities, and she had shown him a world of purpose. She had healed the hollow space in his heart. "What you did," she said, her eyes searching his. "You didn't have to do any of it. You could have just written a check." "A check couldn't fix what was broken," he replied, squeezing her hand. "Not in the world and not in me. You taught me that some things have no price tag. Dignity, integrity, courage. You have all of them, Alara." He looked out at the happy crowd, at the theater built in her brother's name, at the new beginning they had built together. The world was still full of injustice, but he had learned that night that true power wasn't in hoarding wealth or standing above the fray. It was in choosing to stand with those who fight for what is right, no matter the cost. It was a lesson he would spend the rest of his life honoring, with her by his side. The greatest fortune he had ever acquired was not the empire he inherited, but the heart of the woman who had shown him how to be human again.